Darius Cole was 37 years old when his phone buzzed at 12:04 in the morning, and a notification from his legal team confirmed that Vanessa had filed. To the people in their Buckhead neighborhood who knew them, Darius was the quiet one. He drove a used F-150. He wore work boots to neighborhood cookouts. He repaired his own gutters and borrowed the neighbor's pressure washer, and Vanessa's friends called him steady, which was their polite word for unremarkable. She never corrected them. What none of them knew, what Vanessa had staked her entire calculation on them never knowing, was that the man she had decided to discard held the deed to 23 commercial properties across 5 southeastern states, that the LLC bearing his late grandfather's initials had been compounding quietly for 11 years, and that the $50 million penthouse at the top of the Hargrove Tower in Buckhead, the one Vanessa had pointed to from the street once and called a dream, had been registered in that LLC for 9 years. His name was on it. It always had been. What Vanessa had not considered was that Darius had seen this coming for 6 months, that the divorce attorney she had consulted worked in a building he held a partial interest in, and that by the time her filing was time-stamped at midnight, his overnight bag had been packed and sitting in the closet for 11 days. He was not caught off guard. He was ready. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The Sunday before the filing, Darius had been on the back deck he built himself. Cedar planks, pressure-treated post, the kind of structure you did not knock together in a weekend, but assembled with respect for the loads it would need to carry for years. He had laid it the summer before last, over 9 days while Vanessa visited her sister in Houston. She came home and called it beautiful and asked how much the contractor charged. He told her $400 in materials. She had looked at him with an expression he had not fully known how to read until considerably later. He held his coffee and watched the morning light move across the yard with the patience of a man who had never needed the day to move faster than it chose to. Darius had worked for 11 years as facilities and operations director for a commercial property management group in Atlanta. That was what his business card said. That was what Vanessa told people at dinner parties when conversations turned to careers, with a smile that was just slightly too generous to be unperformed. He nodded when she said it because it was accurate. He did oversee facilities operations for a holding company he owned entirely that carried the initials of his grandfather, and that had been acquiring properties since the year he turned 26 with the discipline of a man who understood that the best kind of wealth was the kind no one saw coming. His grandfather, Elwood Cole, had worked 31 years managing inventory for a logistics company in Augusta and never made more than $56,000 in a year. In those same years, he purchased 6 rental properties with the quiet diligence of a man who knew that size was not the same as scale. He died 7 years prior, and at the kitchen table in his final months, he had looked at Darius and said, "A man's name should mean something on paper before it means something in a room." The holding company bore his initials. Every property in the portfolio carried his lesson. Vanessa had been precise and polished in the way of a woman who had always understood the value of the right room. They had met at an industry mixer in Midtown 8 years ago. She had been in commercial leasing for a firm Darius knew quite well from the ownership side, though he never mentioned the connection. She had laughed at something he said about the appetizers, and then looked at him with the appraising attention of a woman deciding whether a person was worth her investment of time. He had thought then that it was genuine interest. He had believed it for longer than the evidence warranted. Those first years had the quality of real things, uncalculated, without the weight of ongoing performance. He had not understood in those years that for some people the performance begins before the introduction, that for some people every relationship has a projected exit from the beginning. He had noticed the name Preston Webb on her phone 4 months before the filing, a preview notification face up on the kitchen counter, visible for 3 seconds before she crossed the room and flipped it over with the fluency of someone who had been managing this long enough that the covering motion had become automatic. He noted it the way he noted a stress fracture in a load-bearing wall, without alarm, without immediate action, with the clear understanding that the situation required documentation before it required response. His other phone, the business line, the one carrying his account access and advisory correspondence, stayed in his inner jacket pocket where it had lived for 11 years, a detail Vanessa had never once thought to ask about. She came downstairs that Sunday in a dress that was not Sunday-at-home clothing and a fragrance he had not purchased. She said she was meeting her friend Dana for brunch. He handed her the keys she always forgot from the hook by the door. His phone buzzed once as she backed out of the driveway. A message from his property manager at Hargrove Tower. The 43rd floor unit had been prepared per his standing instructions. Access code updated. Biometric elevator access confirmed. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at the cedar deck and thought about how long it had taken to get the post level. Some things had already been done. He did not make the decision to investigate on a feeling. He made it on a pattern. 11 years of commercial real estate had drilled into Darius the principle that feelings were unreliable, but patterns were not. A tenant who paid 11 months perfectly and went quiet in the 12th was not unlucky. They were telling you something the lease agreement had laid out 3 pages in, if you read it carefully enough. He applied the same principle to his personal life with the same composure. He hired Bernadette James the Monday after he saw the name on the phone. She was a licensed investigator with 21 years of experience and a background in financial forensics, and she had the quality Darius valued above almost all others in a professional. She delivered information without editorial commentary and let the facts carry the weight they were meant to carry. His hands didn't shake when she brought him the first report. Preston Webb was a real estate attorney at a Midtown firm. He drove a black Tesla. He lived in a Morningside condo with a rooftop terrace. He was 43 years old, twice divorced, and had been meeting Vanessa at a hotel in Sandy Springs on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for a minimum of 4 confirmed months. Hotel records, parking garage footage, restaurant receipts flagged from Vanessa's personal credit card. All of it was in the folder with a date stamp and a page count, delivered without comment. His face remained perfectly still as he read through it. He set the folder down and moved to the second item Bernadette had flagged. Vanessa had opened an individual checking account at a separate institution 6 months prior, 2 months before the first confirmed meeting with Preston. She had been transferring $1,200 to $2,400 per month from their joint account under the listed category of household expenses. The total over 6 months was $11,400. She had also consulted 3 family law attorneys, 2 confirmed through billing records. Preston Webb had a close professional relationship with one of them. They had been building this together. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. What Vanessa had not understood, what she could not have understood because she had never asked the questions that would have led her there, was that Darius had structured his holdings precisely for this category of event long before she walked into his life. His name appeared in a registered agent filing in Delaware. His name appeared on a facilities management business card in Atlanta. Those 2 documents were not connected by anything Vanessa had ever seen or thought to look for. Claudette Morrison had insured it 11 years ago and reviewed the structure every year since. He opened a tab on his laptop and pulled up the Hargrove Tower ownership records. His records. He looked at the 43rd floor the way a builder looks at a thing he made with the intention of it lasting, with the steady satisfaction of a man who built for the long term and had the patience to wait for the long term to arrive. A design magazine had profiled the tower's penthouse level in 2019 in a piece about Buckhead's vertical living revolution. The photographs showed bamboo floors, 12-foot windows, a kitchen with Italian stone counters, and a professional range. The article had not named the owner. Vanessa had shared the piece on her social media that same week with the caption, "One day." She had no idea the day had already come and gone. He opened a folder on his desktop and named it Preparation. Then he called Claudette Morrison and told her to be ready to move. Claudette had been Darius's attorney since the first property closed 11 years ago. She was 62, kept her hair natural and close-cropped, maintained an office in a building Darius held a partial interest in, and brought to every meeting the quality he valued in her above almost everything. She separated what she felt from what she knew, and only ever brought one of those things to the table. She reviewed Bernadette's complete report and the accompanying financial documentation for 14 minutes without speaking. Then she set the folder flat on her desk and looked at Darius over the rim of her glasses. She doesn't know about the LLC. No, she doesn't know about the tower unit. She pointed to it from the street once and said it was beautiful. She never asked who owned it. Claudette was quiet for a moment. She'll file for equitable distribution of marital assets, joint accounts, the house, possibly a portion of your management company salary. She'll believe she's being aggressive. She set her pen down precisely. She'll have no idea she's claiming a fraction of a fraction. I know. The 43-floor unit alone is valued at $50 million. I'm aware of the number. She looked at him for a moment with the measured expression of a woman deciding how much professional admiration was appropriate. Then she opened a clean legal pad, walked me through every asset and its acquisition date. We protect everything that predates the marriage under separate property doctrine. Georgia law is very clear on this. He had needed to hear it from someone who examined the paperwork without a stake in the outcome and arrived at the same destination. Preparation was not paranoia. It was architecture. He drove to his mother's house in Cascade Heights the following Saturday morning. Alma Cole was 68, retired from 31 years teaching middle school science, and still kept the same kitchen she had raised Darius in. The yellow curtains, the round table by the window where he had done his homework each evening, with the focused seriousness of a child who understood early that seriousness was the primary tool available to him. She had met Vanessa 4 times in 8 years of marriage. Darius had registered that number without commenting on it. She poured his coffee before he asked. She sat across from him and waited. She filed. He said. His mother turned her mug once in both hands. Your grandfather's spirit already knew you'd be all right, she said. He'd be proud of what you'd built. She paused. What do you remember about her from when you first brought her around? His mother looked at him with the patient attention of a woman who had been keeping an answer in reserve for a long time. That woman never once asked me a single question about you, she said. Not in 8 years, not your childhood, not what you were like, not what you loved or what you feared. Nothing. She set her mug down. You learn everything about a person from the questions they don't ask. He thought about Vanessa pointing at the tower from the street and calling it a dream without ever asking whose dream it already was. His mother reached across the table and pressed her hand over his once, briefly, the way she had done when he was 9 years old and had built something crooked and needed to understand it was not the end. You know exactly what to do, she said. You always did. Some men built visible things. The best ones built things that didn't need to be seen until exactly the right moment. Bernadette's second report completed the picture. Preston Webb carried $340,000 in combined personal debt. The Tesla, the condo mortgage, 2 prior divorce settlements that had not been generous to him. His professional involvement with Vanessa's case was not purely personal. He had been advising her on structuring her discovery request to maximize the claim against Darius's visible assets, operating on the assumption, the catastrophically wrong assumption, that what was visible was everything there was. He had not checked the registered agent filing in Delaware. He had not cross-referenced the management company's beneficial ownership structure. He had not looked at the property tax rolls on 43 floors of Buckhead real estate. He had looked at a man in work boots who drove an F-150 and arrived at the conclusion that required the least investigation. Claudette added the joint account transaction history. 14 months of automated alerts, each one itemized and dated, to the disclosure brief. In the 10 days before the midnight filing, Darius came home each evening with the same composure he brought to a job site inspection. He cooked Tuesday dinners the way he always had. Cast iron, the window above the stove cracked open to the night air. He listened to Vanessa talk about her work, the restaurant she wanted to try, the friend whose engagement she was excited about. He answered her questions about his day with the measured accuracy of a man who had concluded that honesty and disclosure were not always the same thing. He refilled her wine glass. He folded the blanket on the couch the way he had folded it for 8 years. Through the kitchen window, the cedar deck was dark and solid in the late November evenings, level and true and entirely his work. She had no idea when the notification arrived at 12:04. He had been awake for an hour. He sat in the kitchen with the lights on low, holding his coffee, thinking about his grandfather turning a $56,000 salary into 6 properties, one careful transaction at a time, building something no one around him was measuring because no one around him understood what he was measuring. He set the phone on the table. He went to the closet. He picked up the bag. The mediation was scheduled for 10 in the morning, 3 weeks after the filing. Claudette had used those 3 weeks to produce a 41-page asset disclosure document, tabbed, indexed, organized by acquisition date and ownership structure. That was the most comprehensive accounting Darius had reviewed outside of a formal due diligence package. He arrived first. He wore a charcoal suit. He sat with the open, attentive composure he brought to every meeting where he already knew how the numbers resolved. Vanessa arrived with Preston Webb, which said everything necessary about her confidence and almost nothing useful about her judgment. Preston wore a gray suit with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was entering a negotiation he had already mapped. He had reviewed the joint accounts. He had reviewed the marital home's assessed value. He had reviewed Darius's management company compensation records. He had prepared a settlement demand he considered appropriately aggressive. He had no idea what was sitting on the other side of the table. Claudette set the 41-page disclosure in front of the mediator and slid a copy to Preston's side without preamble. Preston opened it. He read the first page. He read the second. The practiced ease in his face went somewhere it would not return from that morning. "What is this?" Vanessa asked. "My client's complete asset disclosure," Claudette said. As required under Georgia law, Vanessa looked at Preston. Preston was on page 6, where Hargrove Tower appeared for the first time. His finger stopped under the unit valuation. He looked up at Darius. Darius looked back at him with complete stillness and said nothing. "Hargrove Tower," Preston said. He was not asking. He was processing what he was reading and beginning to understand that the processing was going to take considerably longer than the morning he had planned. "My client has held beneficial ownership in that property for 9 years," Claudette said. "Acquired 4 years prior to the marriage. Maintained under separate property doctrine throughout. The 43rd floor residential unit carries an independent appraisal value of $50 million. The room went quiet. Vanessa looked at Darius with an expression he had never seen on her face in 8 years of marriage. It was the expression of a person standing inside a floor plan they believed they had memorized, finding that the walls were entirely different from the drawing they had been working from. "You own that building," she said. "Part of it," Darius said. "The residential unit I own outright, for 9 years, before we were married." She turned back to the disclosure. Page 12, the full portfolio summary. 23 properties across 5 states. Combined assessed value at the prior fiscal year, $180 million. The marital period appreciation subject to equitable distribution, documented precisely, without ambiguity, was a figure considerably less dramatic than the total, because Claudette had spent 3 weeks ensuring that every dollar predating the marriage was protected by documentation that was beyond challenge. Preston set the folder down. The settlement demand he had prepared was a document built for a version of Darius Cole that had never existed. "She's been making regular withdrawals from the joint account," Claudette continued, sliding the transaction alert history across the table. 14 months, totaling $11,400. "We'll need that addressed in the settlement." Vanessa looked at Preston with the expression of a person looking at the only other person in the room who was supposed to have handled this. Darius leaned forward, hands flat on the table, and looked at Vanessa. "I want the house," he said. "You can have the remaining joint account balance, your vehicle, and everything in that house that was yours before the marriage." He paused. "What you don't get is anything you thought you were taking, because it was never what you believed it was." He could see the shape of the sentence forming. Something about the years. Something about what she deserved. Something assembled to reframe the terms of the room. Her mother, seated quietly at the far end of the table at Claudette's specific invitation, set her hand flat on the surface with a single quiet sound. "Vanessa." Her mother's voice was low and even and carried the weight of a woman who had been watching this trajectory for longer than anyone else in the room. "Don't." Darius stood. He buttoned his jacket. He gathered his copy of the disclosure and tucked it under his arm. "My team will follow up with yours," he said to the mediator without looking back at the table. He walked to the door. He held it open for Claudette. He did not look back at the room, or at the unused settlement demand sitting beside Preston's water glass, or at the face of the woman who had filed at midnight and arrived here certain she understood what she had filed against. You did not need to be a developer to recognize the shape of a structure built on a foundation that was never going to hold. 14 months passed, like the closing of a clean transaction. Documented, finalized, moved past without remainder. Darius stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 43rd floor and watched Atlanta come awake in the early gray of a November morning. The city below moved without knowing who was watching it. That had always been how he preferred it. The coffee was hot. The bamboo floors he had selected for the unit caught the first eastern light and held it warm and steady and entirely his. He had moved in the morning after the midnight filing, exactly as the story began, with the overnight bag he had packed 11 days prior and the unhurried composure of a man executing a plan that had never required an audience. The house in Buckhead had been returned to him in the settlement. Claudette had been thorough. He sold it 16 weeks later without ceremony, because it represented a version of his life he had finished building. A woman named Renata came through from the kitchen with her own mug and stood beside him at the window, without needing to fill the morning with words. She was an architect he had met on a Nashville development project, a woman who looked at structures with the kind of respect that only comes from understanding how long the right ones take to build. She asked good questions. She arrived without assumptions. She had looked at his portfolio once across a conference table and said, "You think in decades." And he had said, "That's the only way the math works." And she had looked at him in a way that required no immediate explanation. The portfolio had grown to 27 properties. A commercial development in Charlotte was 3 months from completion. The Elwood Cole Scholarship Fund at Augusta Technical College had issued its third cohort of awards to students in the construction management and trades programs, young men and women from the same zip codes. Where Elwood Cole had once turned a logistics warehouse salary into 6 rental properties, one careful, unannounced transaction at a time. Vanessa had settled for the remaining joint account balance and her vehicle, as documented. Preston Webb's involvement in the case had generated a bar association review, the outcome of which was a matter of public record. Darius had heard the result through Claudette, registered it without satisfaction or its opposite, and moved on. He did not follow it. He did not need to. He pressed both palms around his mug and stood 43 floors above the city his grandfather had told him to build toward. Quietly, on paper, in rooms no one else was watching yet. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free, he was solvent, he was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.